Viewers, you're watching the Policy Times, India's only media which talks about public policy, foreign affairs, and one of the core areas that we cover is also entrepreneurship and impact of technology in day-to-day life. Now, when we talk about business, because business in the capitalist mode of society is the backbone of economic growth, and it's actually the engine of economic growth. And business, the most important factor in business, entrepreneurship, or in general in the capitalist economic model is sales. Because if the sales is weak of any organization, I think it will always struggle to survive, to sustain, and to thrive. To talk on that, I think I will not talk about sales much. We have an expert, Mr. Subhadip Mazumdar, who is the director at. So he's one of the prominent authors, and he has recently written a book on called Saleswalah, where he has very simply articulated the very art of sales by picking some small stories from the streets of Kolkata and different part of the country. Shubhadeep, welcome to our show. The first question that I want to start off with is, how do you define sales?
Thank you so much for inviting me to Policy Times. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor. Very, very important and pertinent question. If you have to define sales, if I have to define sales in one sentence, I would say sales is a transfer of emotion. Okay, so often we make sales pretty complex, but end of the day, if you look into sales, it's about communication. Okay, so it's all about telling a story. It's all about telling someone what you have as a product, as a service, and telling a wonderful value proposition through a story. So it could be very simple, and it should be very simple, because it is all about communicating what you have in the best possible way, without inhibition and with all the conviction and confidence. So to tell the definition of sales, or tell a little bit about what is sales, let me tell you a story. So when you talk about sales, why would you even try to sell? You try to sell if there is an opportunity. Now, how do you create an opportunity? How do you understand there's an opportunity? So there's a interesting story which I often tell when I give sales seminars or sales when I talk to salespeople. It is so long back. Once upon a time, there was a shoe salesman, and he sent one of his salespeople to this particular town. And this guy goes there in this unknown town, and he came back after a sales survey, market survey. And his manager, the owner of the shoe sales company, he asked him, so how did you see the opportunity? How did you see the market? He said, it's absolutely no market for us, because nobody wears shoes there.
I see.
And the sales manager said, that's 100% market.
Right.
So it is all about being positive. How do you identify the opportunity? So to me, it is very simple, and often we overlook that simplicity, just as that shoe salesman who went to do the market survey.
Just to repeat, normally people would conventionally understand sales means bringing revenue for the organization. Bringing revenue means either selling the product or service of the company that you are working for. So now you articulated this in a complete story mode, saying that sales is about transfer of emotion. Now, how is this transfer of emotion and telling a story is connected with the revenue? So if you can just connect this.
Absolutely, everything is connected. The revenue is a consequence. Okay, sales is the revenue is the transaction side of sales. Okay, so that happens once you have established that relationship, once you have established that need. Right. You do not get into the conversation.
So it's about establishing that relationship.
It's a journey. So first thing is about creating the rapport, building that trust. Once the trust is established, the product value or the service value is recognized, the transaction is the consequence, and revenue is the next step.
Since the implementation or change of technology or transition of technology, do you think in the last 10 years, how has the sales trends, approach, strategy changed?
It has changed dramatically, it's drastically, I would say chalk and cheese. I mean, I wouldn't even say 10 years. 10 years today in today's digital age is like, it's like it's a century.
Right.
But I would say if I have to look into the last 3 to 5 years, the whole amplification, the approach, the perception building of sales has changed. There's huge impact of digital influence, social media. If you look into the YouTubes, if you look into the Facebooks, if you look into the Twitter, if you look into LinkedIn, I think all these have become increasingly important as an influencer. Now, the dialogue and the conversations have become much more shorter, much more crisper, and it is also because the attention span of individuals have also become smaller. So we are in an attention economy,
right.
And you have to build your sales approach and sales strategies in accordance. So you have to be very, very crisp in terms of your messaging. You have to prepare a couple of hours, if not more, for a 15-minute meeting, because you have to be concise. You have to learn how to share your messages in a very concise model, crisp model, because people will not give you an hour of conversation time, especially when you're going there for the first meeting. Your window of attention, your window of opportunity is very, very small. So it has become, I would say, more competitive, more complex, but it is also about how do you approach it, makes it simple or complex. So that preparation that you do is in terms of understanding the value proposition of your product. And value proposition of your product is different from feature of your product or services. So I think a lot of times salespeople do not understand the differentiation between a feature and a value.
What are the attributes of a successful salesperson? Or what makes a person successful in sales?
I think I would say 3 elements, and I've elaborated that in my book quite well in Saleswalah.
I see.
So there is the framework that I talk about in my book. It's a 6-step framework, but to answer your question, I would say there are 3 things that I say are very, very important. One is the art of storytelling, and I think this is often overlooked and underrated as an attribute of salespeople across the world, including B schools. 2, listening skills, and 3, the emotional balance of a salesperson. So all these 3 constituents are extremely, extremely important attributes of a salesperson, because if you're not listening, then how will you, when I say listening, it's about listening in your environment. It could be in front of a customer, while you're walking on the street, while you're hearing of customer feedback. If you're not listening, how will you prepare yourself to ask better questions?
This interview is extremely relevant for every SME startup entrepreneur who has started a business, because most of the time and most often I have seen people have started the business of ventures out of excessive passion, emotion and vision, but without having much understanding about sales. And believe me, any organization without having a proper sales team or sales setup or sales infrastructure, I think the business will never be sustainable. Now, sales model can be different. What I want to know, what are the common sales mistakes that often companies make? I'm clubbing 2 questions together. The second is, what kind of sales strategy those companies who adapt, what kind of strategies the companies adapt who want to go for a 50 or 100 years type of a sustainable organization format, vis-a-vis some companies who are like self-person driven or individual driven?
Sure. Let me start with the first question in terms of was that the startup model?
Yeah. So what are the common mistakes? Most of the companies make?
So I think, when you look into mistakes that, again, mistakes could be different for a large organization and for a startup. Sometimes they may be similar, but often for startups, I would say the mistakes are different. More from, and I'm telling this because I have myself built 3 organizations. 2 I've exited
Excellent.
in IT in South Africa. The last one to Deloitte. Now, the mistakes I have seen, and I often interact and share ideas with startup founders. I think most often startups that I have seen is they enter with a vision and enter with the product with a little bit of a blind spot. When I say a blind spot, it's like when you're driving and you want to just turn right or left, you need to do a head turn and check who's coming behind. Things that do not catch in the rear view mirror. Get my point? So in that blind spot, often the sales strategy or the approach of sales, or how do you amplify the sales? Because if you look into startups, often a startup doesn't have a lot of resources. They don't have a lot of funding.
Right.
Hence, they will not be able to bring in a lot of experienced salespeople. So in that, you need to think out of the box. You need to think agile. You need to think collaboratively. So people do not, most often has not thought that way. Creating, for example, an alliance strategy. Creating a strategy where you integrate or you partner with other organizations, whether it is locally, whether it's globally. How do you create sales channel? So everything is a channel. You have to multiply. So that's one strategy, that one mistake I've often seen startups sometimes trying to take on too many things in terms of either not being able to define their market and then looking through an unit economics lens, saying that let us first approach this market, and in this market let us only try to go after a target that we can achieve, which is my milestone. Sometimes they think that okay, the world is my market. So for example, in my book I have spoken about the minimum viable audience. So for a startup, the mistake I have most often seen is that they have not been able to identify and define their minimum viable audience. So you understand what is the minimum viable audience, you sell to that minimum viable audience. Once you have sold that, you've got a certain return back to your business. Now you've got revenues. You reinvest some part of that revenue back into business. So you have proven a point. With that proof point, you're now trying to make your market bigger and bigger. So I think that's one mistake which is fundamental, which I've seen a lot of startups make. That's something which definitely I would like to point out.
Right.
In terms of your next question, which is about the strategies.
So what kind of strategy should you have so that your company, or how do you develop or build a sales team so that your organization survives for next 50 to 100 years?
See, again, it's a very broad question, because it's the answer lies in the budget that you have. I think if I have to answer it from a construct of a startup founder, when I'm starting a business, I don't think of 50 years or 100 years horizon. I think of how do I survive 14 months, 18 months, and then from that 18 months I look into 5 years, 10 years. Only after 15, 20 years you look into that horizon and bandwidth, and by that time you would have built enough velocity and enough momentum that the momentum itself will creates its own process, and the engine itself will propel itself. But what is most important, I think the way I'd like to answer your question, if allowed, is it's very similar to an aviation theory. You need to be very cognizant about like an aircraft when it's taking. You need to be very clear when you're taking off and at what how you're taking off. If you can't have your tail touch the ground, you can't try to achieve the velocity too quickly, because your tail will touch the ground and you'll crash. So how do you pace your journey? How you pace that growth is extremely important. And again, some part of it is funding, some part of it is marketing. But today, with the whole digital construct, I think one can be very, very innovative. And you don't need a lot of money, to create a YouTube channel, to do a Facebook, do a live, or do a Twitter. You need to tell good stories. You need to tell effective stories. So in all this, what I would say is facts tell, but stories sell.
You come from the engineering background, then excelling into sales. Now, what is the inspiration behind writing a book called Saleswalah, and what actually kind of message you want to deliver to your audience?
Well, Saleswalah has been, let me first define who is a Saleswala. So Saleswalas are all the people who have their offices, all the street vendors around the world, I term them as Saleswalah. Okay, so they are people who cannot move a deal month to month, quarter to quarter. They have to sell each day, every day, to make their living and their family's survival. So that is my inspiration, because that's, you know, for them it is about that passion that I have to survive, I have to sell. There are no excuses. And I think that is that motivation to be a good salesperson. Markets will change, markets will be tough, geographies will, you know, economies will be, you know, will change. But if you give excuse, you'll never be able to sell. You have to sell in any market. Nobody can give you a guarantee. So my inspiration is, look into those people. Do they talk about economics? Do they talk about markets? Do they talk about the GDP growth? Do they talk about the exchange rate? Do they talk about you know, fluctuations of currency, interest rate coming down, going down? They don't. They don't complain. In all this, they're focusing on selling. So my inspiration has been more from them, since I've seen them grow up in Kolkata. I saw many of them in the streets of, you know, Kolkata, and the streets of, you know, buses and trains of Bengal, selling their wares, you know, small things. And I've always enjoyed the way they, you know, attracted us. You know, a small salesman selling lozenges from, you know, his glass jar in the hot summer months, you know, and telling a story to attract the audience. So I think that energy has always excited me. So that's the inspiration for me to write this book.
This was Subhadip Mazumdar, author who has recently written a book called Saleswalah, which will be out, I think, in the market in the first or second week of March, and we'll have a series of discussions surrounding sales strategy, sales trends, and how startups, big companies, or individuals as sales professional can make a successful career. So thank you so much, Subhadip. And for any startups, entrepreneurs who are watching this episode, do follow the kind of strategies or approaches that you need to imbibe in your strategy. I mean, you have been working so hard to you know, make a mark in the society, to establish your own business. A simple changes in your approach can, I think, convert your business into a sustainable one. Thank you. Keep watching the Policy Times.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.